I had been monitoring my tire condition for a while because this rear tire had 15,000 miles on it. But today while washing the bike, what I initially thought were soap suds was actually the underlying wire in the tire showing through. I'm going to show you how I removed and installed the rear wheel and let my local bike shop install the new tire on the rim. Let's start by removing the leather saddlebags. Yours may be different, but I removed mine by turning two clips counterclockwise like this. Then tilt the saddlebags forward and lift off the underlying bar. We're going to need to remove both mufflers, so grab your socket wrench and let's attack this larger nut first. You don't need to totally unscrew it, but loosen the nut enough to be able to rotate the collar like this. The final two bolts are found here at the rear of the muffler. The nuts for these bolts are welded onto the underside of the muffler bracket, so you only need to be concerned with removing the bolts. Note that both bolts run through this piece of flat chromed metal stock. This hanger is adjustable to help line up the underlying position of the muffler nuts. Take a shop rag and position it between the muffler and the axle nut to prevent damage to the muffler during this next step. Grasp the muffler and move it gently up and down and side to side while pulling it rearward. It may help to twist the muffler in a circle pattern. Once removed, take note of which muffler goes on which side of the bike. Remove this E-clip on the axle nut with a flat screwdriver like this. Next, loosen but do not remove the axle nut with the bike still resting on the ground. Begin to lift the bike into position. We could potentially damage the axle threads by trying to force out the axle while the weight of the wheel and tire is suspended as it is. Therefore, I'm going to relieve that pressure by forcing a couple of wood scraps under the tire. Completely remove the axle nut, revealing the belt adjustment washer underneath. The washer on this side is removable, while the washer on the left side is welded to the axle. I will explain how it works soon. I take my small punch and place it at the center notch of the axle and begin to tap it with a small sledgehammer. At this point, the belt adjustment washer is loose, so just set it aside for now. Before continuing further, I want to point out the right side wheel spacer located here, and the left side located here. These spacers will fall out at some point during the wheel removal, so be aware. Continue to tap on the punch, driving out the axle until you are able to grasp it with your hand and remove it. In my case, the punch came right through the center of the wheel along with the axle. Move the wheel slightly forward, then remove the drive belt. As I begin to remove the scrap wood, note how the spacers fall out. If your bike is like mine, the spacer on the left is a different width than the one on the right, so keep this in mind and reinstall them appropriately. Now this next part gets a bit tricky. As you begin to jack up the bike and the tire and wheel begin to drop, the brake assembly is going to get jammed against the tire and try and slide off the swing arm shelf that it rests on. If it becomes jammed against the wheel, stop and place your shop rag between the brakes and wheel to protect the wheel against scratches. It's possible that deflating the old tire would help with clearance. As I continue to jack the bike higher, the bottom of the tire wants to slide to the right and out from under the bike. So ultimately, this is how I removed it. The belt sprocket can now be removed and is not needed to balance the new tire. This rubber hub, known as the cush drive element, won't be needed either, but do not discard it, just remove it. Leave the brake rotor intact. Shown here is our new Shinko 777 rear tire, along with the new tube and the rim strip necessary when one is running spoked wheels. I will post the parts list underneath this video's description. Here I take advantage of the fact that I will never have better access to the tire and wheel in order to clean them. Always check to make sure the rotation indicator on your brake rotor matches the tire rotation indicator. After all, people do make mistakes. This is where the cush drive element will ultimately engage the wheel. Take it from me, it's easier to mount the rubber element inside the belt sprocket first, as shown here. The star patterned inserts on the wheel will now fit here. I'm going to take some paint thinner to clean up any old grease and anti-seize material off the axle. Although this looks pretty nasty, there isn't any rust or noticeable rough spots as I feel my way around. I now apply new anti-seize material made by Permatex using a gloved finger. A little bit of this goes a long way. Apply it all the way around the axle from one end to the other. Jack the bike to its maximum height. I began to reinstall the same way I removed the tire, by leaning the bottom of the tire to the right as I roll it underneath the bike. This is simply because my jack won't go any higher. Stand the wheel as vertical as possible while attempting to aim the brake rotor to fit between the two brake pads as the bike is lowered into place. If you don't have an assistant, you may have to make adjustments as the bike is lowered in increments. Insert the right side spacer. This spacer tends to stay in place as long as you don't move the wheel. Because that's not possible, I decided to use some painter's tape to assist. I'll tear it off later. I do the same with the left side spacer. As the bike is lowered into position, the right side spacer fits right into place. But the left side spacer is scraped off by the swing arm. Luckily, I was able to just press it back into place as shown. Pull the wheel slightly forward and install the belt. Make any final alignment adjustments, then insert the axle. Using a rubber mallet, begin to drive the axle into place. You should begin to see the axle threads appear on the opposite side. Continue until the adjustment washer touches the swing arm. If you used it, remove the painter's tape. Mount this adjustment washer with the same orientation as the one on the other side of the axle. It is possible to mount this one backwards. Don't ask. Then screw on the axle nut. This is how the adjustment washer works. Using your socket, turn the nut on the left side of the bike clockwise to tighten the drive belt. Because this washer is eccentric, the more you turn it clockwise, the more it presses against the stop, and the further backwards it moves the wheel, thereby tightening the belt. As far as the belt adjustment, the manual states that with 10 pounds of pressure applied, the belt should be visible between these 2 points within the window. Now fully tighten and torque the axle nut. Using a small hammer and keeping your gloves out of the way, reinstall the E-clip over the end of the axle. Using the lubricant of your choice, I used a bit of motor oil, put a thin layer around the inside of the muffler that will join the header pipe, and with the shop rag in position, wiggle and press the muffler into place, and optionally use a tap block. Using blue thread lock in the red container, applied to the 2 rear muffler bolts and reinstall. Torque appropriately. Retighten the 14mm bolt at the front of the muffler. Here I reinstall my saddlebags. Now one last reminder. Anytime you remove or work on your brakes, pump them before riding, or it may be your last ride. And this project is complete.